The Digital Health Voice podcast is brought to you by MedTech World in collaboration with Digital Health Malta. Welcome to episode 16. Wow, so we are in our first season and we are already at episode 16. And today we have with us Amir Bozorgzadeh, who is the CEO and co-founder of VirtuLeap. So our first venture, let's say, from a podcast point of view, into the world of virtual reality and healthcare. And with that in mind, let's dive deep. Hi, welcome Amir. Such a pleasure to have you with us. And also, it's really great to meet people like you. And mostly because sometimes life throws us like curveballs, and you helped us meet up and at really short notice. So that's really cool from your side, Amir, and I really appreciate that. But just to give our listeners a bit of a feel of who you are, with us, I'd like to welcome Amir Bozorgzadeh, who is the CEO and co-founder of VirtuLeap, which is very interesting because it's like a virtuous leap, like a leap, but make a virtuous leap into the unknown. No, it's not unknown because it's about brain health. And tickle a bit my thoughts a bit here, Amir. What brought you here with us today? What's your digital health journey? When I was having a look at what you've been up to, I was listening to words like time banking, journalist, writer. I was like, how did he get to digital health? That must be quite a journey. Tell us all about it.
Well, I think from what I can tell about your personality already, I see a kindred spirit of neurodiversity, someone who might not fit in every box or try to fit within the categories that clearly exist in the world. And I've always been fascinated with typologies, psychological typologies. What's the differences between, these things called extroverts and introverts, and people who are visually oriented versus someone who is kinesthetically, haptic focused versus someone who's really, stereotypical nerd, who's so cognitively focused. People are different, right? And our company, the story, I'm kind of meandering into it, but my journey has more or less, I think, meandered and coalesced at the intersection of a few industries that ultimately reflects my fascination with what we can learn about ourselves. And when you look at the company VirtuLeap, it's a healthcare oriented company, but it's also an education company, EdTech company. What we have basically done is we're at the intersection of the neurosciences and virtual reality to essentially map out the cognitive landscape of individuals for therapeutic use cases, like let's talk about ADHD, let's talk about Alzheimer's, or for, self-knowledge, understanding that you're overdeveloped in some cognitive areas, but underdeveloped in others. And can we do something about it? Well, knowing where you are is always the most important starting point if you want to get anywhere.
But Amir, I'm going to challenge you a bit here. It's really great to hear about VirtuLeap, but how did you get here? It must have been really wow. Really, I'm so I even saw how many followers you have on LinkedIn. That's wow. I think it's double mine for sure, because I'm at 7K. I'm lucky to have 7K, and you're at 14K plus. I'm wow, man.
Yeah.
But tell me, you must have met so many people in your journey. What brought you to kind of even start VirtuLeap in the first place? What's the soul behind it?
I want to give you a nice autobiography kind of answer that explains A went to B, T went to C. Wouldn't that be nice? Like a nice Hollywood movie. However, sometimes life has felt like like being a rat in a maze, being flooded with water, and you're trying to go into every door, and some are closed and some are open, and you get into one. And then after 18 of these doors, you go back, you go on a podcast like this one, and the gentleman goes, explain to me how it happened. And it's a good question, but it's hard to answer without a smile on my face, because A lot of things were fortunate circumstances. A lot of things were serendipitous. My journey began in this particular phase of life. 2015, I began to want to relocate in geography and also change my actual career. I was a market researcher and a games publisher. And what I did was I started writing for tech blogs like VentureBeat and TechCrunch, specifically on virtual reality. So for 4 years, without even making $1, I would just write articles and interview every person in virtual reality sector, as well as augmented reality. I would make articles about VR for digital twins, VR for healthcare in this, treating phobias, VR for using it for agoraphobia, the fear of people, or lots of use cases. And I became slowly, and within 4 years of just writing, someone who became a little confident in entering the startup space myself.
Wow. All right. So like it's so beautiful, like that you were kind of telling us about this writing journey, I have to admit, I didn't expect that.
Sometimes the most interesting people I meet in life, and certainly it describes me at a certain stage, is being unhireable. Mm-hmm. And when you're unhireable, you have to create the market for yourself. And I would say that I'm not everyone's cup of tea. I talk at 100 miles per hour like a chihuahua. I'm really buzzing with a lot of ideas that can, be fun to go out for a beer with. But maybe in the context of a corporate environment, maybe I'm not the quintessential person that fits within the hierarchies of a large elephant-sized organization. Maybe I make more sense on a Han Solo-sized Millennium Falcon ship as a little space pirate. And I think that's what my startup is more characteristic of right now.
Wow, I'm seeing, you're quite far away, like you're thousands of kilometers away, maybe a bit less than 1,000 or like something like 1,000. But I'm feeling the waves of like this kindred spirit, like going back and forth. And you don't always have this kind of energy like happening between two different people. So that's so cool that even though we're so far away, but the brains, sometimes they just connect.
I'll tell you, I met another Maltese.
Wow.
Do we call them Maltese? No, we don't call it Malta.
Yeah, Maltese. Yeah, we're Maltese.
I met another Maltese just recently, and I'm telling you, there's something in your water. You guys are fantastic. your comedy is special, and it appeals to me because you laugh at my jokes, which makes me just so happy to meet you. But the feeling is very, very mutual.
Yeah, and that's why I'm enjoying more and more the podcast, and even like we really should be having more of these conversations in digital health, because when we have these genuine conversations, only then we can overcome all the challenges that we have ahead of us. Be it digital health literacy, be it health literacy, even be it access to virtual reality headsets. A conversation like this, how are we going to solve these kind of challenges? So, like with that in mind, I wanted to talk to you about VirtuLeap. You already started mentioning about this, but I was reading up about VirtuLeap and I heard that you were already working with a number of partner organizations. And I'm sure that these organizations come up with loads of questions on how are they going to, convince a patient, for example, to wear a virtual reality headset? Or how do they load it up? Maybe they even call you at 12 p.m. at 12 at midnight because they're in a different time zone, asking you, listen, our headset got something happened with it. We can't use it anymore. So, how does your company develop these relationships with these health organizations? How are you guys doing with them? Like, any exciting projects that we should know about?
So one thing that I have to say that I discovered quite early in is that virtual reality as a sector, this is not its first wave. It's not even its second wave. It's not even its third wave. This is like literally the fourth or fifth wave that began with pioneers, specifically VR for healthcare in the 90s. Even late 80s, you had Terence McKenna And Timothy Leary of the psychedelic world even talking about, virtual reality and the transcendence of the human condition back then. And then you had people like UCLA and in like Californian institutes and also like Stanford, Walter Greenleaf, Albert Skip Rizzo. These people started in the 90s to apply virtual reality for PTSD, for so many important neuro rehabilitation use cases. And so when you enter the space, you realize you're not entering in a vacuum. You're entering a space stepping on the shoulders of people who have tried to do this and make VR available to the world for literally 3 decades. And so that said, when you enter the space, you find some of these prominent neuroscientists, neurologists, cognitive scientists at different institutes who are already just waiting for it. And that's your low-hanging fruit. They're like, finally, the commercial groups are starting to have a narrower gap in creating more readily available technology at a better price point, with better graphics, with better comfortable kind of form factor. And all those things are kind of happening right now. And COVID, for however dramatic it has traumatized me in the last 2 years, it's done very well in accelerating even the most stubborn organizations that might not be wanting to use VR because of all those issues you just mentioned. But people are really going behind it. The FDA 2 years ago in the US created a new category dedicated to VR called medical extended reality. They gave breakthrough designation for a VR pain management solution. So the kind of opportunities are, thankfully, some of them were already waiting to happen. And the other ones required some wrestling. But typically what I've realized about a sector like this is you got to, just like today, you wanted to do this podcast, the timing worked out because the stars were aligned. The only relationships that I found that work with our clinical partners that are trying to apply our technology for Alzheimer's disease, for example, they happen because the stars aligned, and it moves forward naturally. When you try to force it, that's when you're asking for trouble.
Yeah, in fact, like you're mentioning, the stars are aligned, and I can't believe this, because up to this morning, I wasn't sure that this podcast in particular was gonna happen, and even better than this, I had a conversation about virtual reality just this morning with an academic.
The stars were aligned.
And the stars definitely were aligned towards virtual reality today. I even got a reply to a conversation from someone who is working in VR. The stars are aligned. I have to admit this. So there are some things, sometimes that they don't have an explanation. They don't. And I think also it just reminded me how many times the stars aligned in the COVID pandemic as well. Even myself, in my experience of the pandemic, there were situations where the stars weren't aligned, and you force and you force and you push, and things don't get through. All right? But then at some point, tick, 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 tock, everything comes in a straight line, and that's the time to take the leap. That's really the time.
The virtual leap.
The virtual. Oh, I love that. Nice one.
It's okay.
It's really good.
It's a dad joke. But I agree with what you're saying, and it only means more in the case of emerging technologies and their intersection with healthcare.
Yeah, it does.
You can't force a healthcare system to do what it doesn't want to do. So it has to be the right timing, or you're going to die. Because behind me are, in those 3 waves, plenty of companies who try to do not what we did, what we're doing, but there's skeletons, right? Those skeletons of the previous companies, the previous startups, the previous founders, they serve as fertilizer that causes the soil to be just right now for me to grow, potentially, knock on wood. But it was at their expense, so to speak, because their stars were aligned in a very different way than ours are today.
Yeah, I'm seeing this happening in digital health quite often. That there's initiative. It starts off maybe sometimes a bit too early. In fact, it's also even reminded me about this digital contact tracing apps, for example. I think that they will be amazing in in the near future. But right now, they caught up a lot. They got a lot of traction, and there was a lot of interesting work going on. But they're not there as yet. They're not there as yet. They will be, but not yet. And we really have a lot to learn from that. And that will be a bit of this what you've just mentioned. This. I'm not going to call it graveyard, because there are still a lot of working with things at work, but it's like the lessons learned, and digital health, and especially MedTech as well, is the future of it is going to be based on a lot of lessons learned. And from your experience with VirtuLeap, and also I'm really impressed by your writing, like from all the writing that you've done, like, what does the future look like for digital health and MedTech, and how does VirtuLeap fit into the picture? Like, do you see it, like, how do you see it fitting in? How do you see it, like, transforming even digital therapeutics?
Even the VR headsets that exist today, they're so nice to some extent, but if you look at it from the point of view of the future, looking backwards, I'm sure we're going to say, what are these huge things that are still quite grotesque? I think we're going to be laughing actually at how big they are, and what's missing to make them not so freaking big. Well, 5G, I think. I think the main thing we're all waiting for is a quality, an order of magnitude faster connectivity that allows the processing. Like, I don't think the word download and I don't think the word install will be in our vocabulary in, let's say, 15 years, because the speed of connectivity will offload all of the processing that currently happens in these clunky things to happen on edge servers outside. And you actually don't have to do much processing inside because you're streaming everything in real time. That's how fast the connectivity is. And so spatial computing, like VR and AR, the flow of traffic is volumetric. It's an order of magnitude more data about the human condition being passed through the market of operators out there are going to be making a lot of money from the bandwidth that's about to explode once 5G comes in. But it'll also enable this next generation of spatial computing to happen so seamlessly that when we are using these headsets, they'll be able to be smaller and more comfortable and less awkward. Because right now, the mainstream people are not going to be using VR pervasively because they're still kind of awkward and geeky looking. AR and headsets need to get, slimmer and more comfortable and more accepted. They're not there yet.
Maybe sexy.
I was going to use the word, but I use it too.
It's okay. It's allowed. It's allowed.
It's sexier is exactly the description of it. I don't like virtual reality for escapism and entertainment. I think VR is a very special technology for surgical, short, sweet, intense experiences that can help you address something in a meditative and very, very focused way. I think AR is the pervasive kind of way that even our games and our technology will move into AR when it's ready. But AR isn't going anywhere until we have 5G and 6G and whatever G's you got after that. But, installations, downloading, and hardware capabilities, it's really what we're waiting for. And ultimately, what will that look like, in my opinion, in about 20 years when I'm much older, is I think we're going to be in a world where literally you're going to be walking around with digital companions. You're going to be not going to Disneyland, and you're going to be a digital sprite version of Mickey Mouse is going to come up, and you're going to purchase your ticket with Mickey Mouse digital version. And Mickey Mouse is not going to be your tour guide. And everyone actually, if they take off the AR headsets, if aliens came and visited, they would think we're all crazy because we're talking to some imaginary friends. But that's going to be the intersection of AR with machine learning, with every buzzword I'm going to throw out here. But that's the future I see happening. I see chatbots infused with machine learning intelligence, fueled with all of the intelligence of the repositories of medical information and insights, being at your beck and call to help you live your optimum life, to be able to not ever be in danger, more or less, of doubts and having to not be able to access the best of care because you can't afford it or you don't have access to it. I think democratization of the bleeding edge of everything at this intersection is what ultimately is the vision. But that could be just my naivety at work right here. That's where I'm kind of seeing it all moving towards.
Yeah, my wife passes comments about my naivety when I come up like with granddastic ideas and like saying, "Oh, we should do this," and then like my wife comes to me and tells me, "Okay, so how are you gonna do this?" And I'm like, "All right, so we have to do this and that." No. And you get like this back and forth conversation. But I would be the one coming up with these grandiose ideas sometimes, and then like you need someone to kind of pin you down to earth and help you to do this. And like from what you're telling me, like I had like some really cool. Can you tell us like about the games that you've done specifically for brain health?
Sure.
Like some case examples. Like how has this really worked with the organizations you've collaborated with? How like what have you gained? Like were you able to do some studies? Like I'm really curious.
So what we've done is we're a mix of neuroscientists and game developers, basically this company. The neuroscientist takes all this neuroscience research that's collecting dust, and she just, waves it around, gets that dust off it, and goes, what can we actually do with this research? So she figures out a way to take this research and make it into a gamified exercise that can ultimately align to the research. And she needs the help of a game developer to figure out a way to make that neuropsychological assessment a little bit more attractive and digestible for a regular user. And each one of these tests a different little cognitive function. We actually make games that are specifically targeting 18 different cognitive functions. So memory and information processing and problem solving, but also because of VR, spatial orientation, motor control, spatial audio awareness, you see? So each of these games is a fun, like 3-minute experience that gives you a sense of how your performance is in any of these particular domains. And you get a sense of, let's say, my memory skills are here, my motor control skills are there. I sleep really badly this week. Oh, my memory scores are doing a little worse. Oh, sleeping has an effect on my cognitive performance. I should be taking care of that. It's each of these games is basically a test that assesses as well as gives you the opportunity to train yourself in that particular way.
Wow. So listen, Amir, I'm trying to be practical here because remember, I'm a medical doctor by training, and I'm also surrounded by clinicians as well a bit. Like in their attitude, like, how are you going to solve the problem for me now? Like, not yesterday, now. But like, how do you see, for example, doctors prescribing, for example, VR? Do you see them, for example, patients coming to a special VR clinic where they have all the virtual reality headsets or hardware? Or do you see patients literally from their home having a conversation, then being recommended to, install or download? I know that you said that we should phase out those words, but how do you imagine it working in a very practical way? Or will there be no interaction whatsoever with the doctor and just patients will need to find a solution and will have the solution right at their fingertips, or let's say virtual reality tips, so to say?
Nice. That well, here, most of the early partnerships are like, for example, Vall d'Hebron Institute in Barcelona. They're doing one of our first clinical studies. They're using our games in an 18-month study, which is going to validate whether our solution can slow down cognitive deterioration in people with type 2 diabetes. Now, type 2 diabetes sufferers have 2 times risk factor towards developing Alzheimer's. And so this is their interest. We're supporting them on this particular study. The agenda of the study is theirs. So in that case, the people who are going to be part of that clinical study are going to go to the hospital and they're going to access it there. But we've created companion tools called like the remote control that allows us to also have the headset given to the person, and the doctor could, navigate it remotely with their phone or their tablet. We're trying to give all these options to them because we don't know yet how the market is going to best adopt it, because that's why it's called an emerging technology. It might be the 5th wave of VR and we have to wait for the 6th wave. I don't think so. However, we're creating the means for people to access it at home because it's $300 per headset. They can afford it nowadays. It's three times more for my phone than this virtual reality headset. So, it's a joke. People are going to go, VR headsets are too expensive. Well, it's all about your valuation. Some people I meet, they value it a lot and it's not expensive. Some people don't want to use it, and so they say it's expensive as an excuse. But the experiences that are in a virtual reality environment will be accessible at a physical site at a hospital with specialists. And I don't think you can remove specialists for quite some time. I'm not saying there's a elimination of that factor, but it's something that can also be taken home. Whether it becomes one or the other, I think it also depends on what I said before about 5G allowing these technologies to become smaller, more accessible, less awkward, and like you said, sexier.
Yeah, I mean, wow. So that's quite a lot to digest. And believe it or not, we're coming towards the end of this podcast. I'd love to speak to you for hours, and I think we will be speaking a bit longer, especially when you come to Malta, hopefully later on this year. And I have like a question to ask you and a challenge to you. So, Amir, I'm going to give you 1 minute now to raise awareness on a topic of your choice. It doesn't have to be health related. And maybe I possibly gave you some ideas about what this topic can be. But the floor is yours. You've got 1 minute and raise awareness on any topic of your choice. All yours, Amir.
I spend so much of my daytime focused on mild cognitive impairment and the need for us to start looking at our mental fitness. And I know this is my company's stuff, but I'm the salesman of the company, so I just can't resist. It's just funny that we see, in ancient times in Asia, esoteric philosophies of the mind and body being one, right? However, in most cases, we like to separate the body and mind. We don't really think of the psychosomatic relationship between the body and mind. They don't, perhaps a physical tick or twick or issue or disorder could be interrelated with a psychological one. We don't, as persons, as individuals, we try to separate it and give it to specialists. And I think that the time has come for us to start to take note of our mental fitness, our cognitive health, our not just using our tools, use whatever tools you'd like, but thinking about, very early in your 20s, even in your teens, understanding where you're strong, where you're weaker, trying to develop on where you're weaker, thinking about if someone were to go to a gym, I always remember this, someone were to go to a gym and overdevelop their chest muscles, but they never develop their legs. It looks pretty awkward, but they can see it. They can go, I got chicken legs, right? That's what they would say. Where are your chicken legs, cognitively speaking? There's no reason for people not to become aware of those things in themselves and become more wholesome versions of themselves. And so whatever it is, VR this, mobile that, go out into nature, do whatever you need to do. Are you exercising enough? Are you eating the right things? Take a hold of it, because when we get to the later stages of our life, we reap what we sow, and we have the opportunity right now to really take care of our futures in a way that I think is our responsibility now.
I've got a good friend of mine who is focused on neuroscience. I would say he's a neuroscientist himself. And I definitely now, thanks to you, Amir, have a lot to tell him. And with that in mind, I'd like to thank you, Amir. Grazie. And thank you to all our followers who are listening, who are making this conversation so meaningful, because they learn from it and they transfer the knowledge to other individuals who create altogether a digital health environment, something which is friendly towards digital health. And I would like to invite all our followers to follow us on all our social media, on MedTech World, LinkedIn, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, you name it, and even on the Digital Health Malta as well, which is one of the main partners for this podcast. And with that in mind, I tell you, Saha. Goodbye. Cheers.